Right, Alhamdulillah, it's already 10 and we'll be starting, inshallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good morning I greet to all of you here, especially to our Professor Dr. Alexander Knysh, our honorable speaker today. And inshallah, today he will be talking about the degrees of human perfection in sainthood, in which he will try to compare and analyze between Ibn al Arabi and also Ibn Taymiyyah, inshallah. As for the session ongoing, after his lecture, you are given the permission to ask directly to him, or you can put the questions in the chat session, and I will read out aloud for him. Okay, so before we are going to start our lecture, let me introduce our honorable speaker for today, inshallah. So for all of you who did not know about him yet, this is his brief biography. So right now, Prof. Alexander Knysh is actually a professor of Islamic Studies at the University of Michigan, United States of America. He is also the director of Islamic Studies program at St. Petersburg State University in Russia. Prof. Alexander is an expert, we can say an expert, in the field of Islamic philosophy, Islamic studies, Islamic theology, Sufism, and many other related fields of Islamic studies. His interests include also Quranic studies, history of Muslim theologians, philosophical and juridical thought, and also modern Islamic and Islamist movement in comparative perspective. He has also published, he is a prolific writer, alhamdulillah. He has published numerous publications on these subjects, including 12 books. The latest books are Sufi Islam in Historical Perspective, second edition by New York and London Routledge, 2017. I'm sorry for the interference. Sufism, A New History of Islamic Mysticism, by published by Princeton and Oxford, Princeton University Press, 2017. Sufi Cosmology, co-edited with Christian Lynch, published by E.J. Brill on 2022, and Sufism After the USSR, in which he write in co-edited in Russian, co-edited with Igor Pankov, Sergei Abashin, published by Marjani Foundation and Al-Maqam, 2022. He is also a sectional editor for Sufism of the Encyclopedia of Islam, third edition, published by E.J. Brill, and he is also the executive director of the E.J. Brill Handbooks of Islamic Mysticism book series. He now lives in Michigan. All right. So that's our brief introduction to our honorable speaker. So without ado, I would like to invite him to give the special lecture for today. Prof, you are warmly welcome.
Thank you very much, Shoaib, for your very kind and generous introduction. I want this meeting to be informal, so if you have questions, really urgent questions, you can interrupt me and say, this is not clear, or I disagree with you, and I'll be happy to discuss the issue with you. However, if it's not very urgent, let's save the questions for the end, or for the questions and answer section. I will also be happy to answer any questions related to my study of Sufism and Islam in general. A few words about where I am. I live close by the automotive capital of the United States, Detroit, which is home to the major automakers, world-known automakers, Chrysler, Fiat, General Motors, and Ford. So Ford started to bring workforce from the Middle East. In the early 20th century, he needed workers. So first, he imported, quote unquote, Arabs of Christian background from Lebanon and Syria. But then he also started to bring in Muslim Arabs, also from the Levant, from what today is Palestine, Israel, Jordan, and Syria. So that's why my area, the area I live in, Michigan, has a large Muslim population, which consists of Arabs, Iranians, Persians, Turks, and some other Islamic groups. Unfortunately, the Malaysia and Indonesia is not very well represented. However, we used to have a lot of Malay students at some point. I think there are fewer today. So why the study of Islam in an area which is very remote from the Muslim world? Because this is a public university, University of Michigan. We have 3 campuses. I'm on the central campus called Ann Arbor campus. Ann Arbor is the city in which I'm now located. So the local population, because many of them are of Muslim background, they send their children to the university, and because the university is funded by the state of Michigan, they want their heritage to be represented on the faculty of the university. That explains why we have a very large Arab Islamic studies program, which also has Iranian, Persian studies, Armenian studies, Turkish studies, Ottoman studies, and Islamic studies. So it's we also have ancient Middle East studies, that's Egyptology. We have ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Sumer, Akkadian, Assyrian language, and also modern Aramaic languages, because we have a large Chaldean Christian population from Iraq. So without further ado, I will talk about the topic. The topic is Ibn Arabi and Ibn Taymiyyah. I addressed this topic in my earlier book, but I never discussed the views of Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Arabi. This is the book which was published in 1999 by State University of New York Press. And that's where I dealt with the 2 thinkers. After a long time, I revisited the relations between Ibn Arabi and Ibn Taymiyyah, and I would like to share with you my research. Again, what I'm saying about Ibn Taymiyyah in Ibn al Arabi is my personal opinion. You're welcome to challenge or correct me, and I'm always very grateful for your feedback. I hope everyone hears me well. If not, please notify Mr. Schweib about the problems. So I'm beginning to share the screen. With my presentation. And this is the official title of my presentation, Degrees of Human Perfection and Sainthood. Sainthood, of course, is walaya or wilaya. There are 2 different pronunciations. Some think that they mean different things. Other scholars disagree. One of those who disagree is my own student, American Muslim, Ayub Palmer, who wrote a very interesting book about sainthood in Islam. Here it is. It was published by Brill, the same publishing. It's called Sainthood and Authority in Early Islam. Al-Hakim at-Tirmidhi's theory of wilaya, that's he uses wilaya, and re-envisioning the Sunni Caliphate. So let's now move to the next slide. So how does one achieve perfection and sanctity or sainthood in the pre-modern Muslim world? There were several recipes for achieving perfection, kamal. The plural of the people who possess perfection are kummal. This term is used in Sufi writings, so it's not fished out of a thin air. It is available. It can be found in the original sources. And sanctity, walaya or wilaya, depending on your agreement or disagreement with my former student Palmer. This concept were understood very differently by different thinkers or theologians. This concept reflected different understanding of not just these two concepts proper or per se, but also the responsibility of human beings in this world and their destiny in the hereafter. Some pre-modern Muslim thinkers or theologians, let's say ulama or mutakallimun, emphasized pious action, moral, ethical behavior, and exemplary worship of God, whereas others gave precedence to knowledge, and not just any knowledge, but revelatory knowledge, or gnosis, divinely inspired knowledge, which they attributed to the friends of gods or saints. Saints, of course, is a shortcut for the friends of God, and this term is controversial. We can address it if we have time. But the Arabic words are awliya Allah, this is for plural, and wali Allah is for singular. In this view, the friends of God are primarily knowers of God, al-arifun billah. The most influential theories of human perfection and sainthood formulated, as some of you may know, by Muhammad bin Ali al-Hakim at-Tirmidhi, who died around 910. No one knows exactly when he died, but this is an approximate date. And a few centuries later, Muhammad bin Ali, also his namesake, Ibn al Arabi, of whom you all know, of Al-Andalus, he took up some ideas of Al-Hakim at-Tirmidhi and developed them in his works, especially in Fusus al-Hikam, the bezels or ringstone of wisdom, and in the Meccan revelations or Meccan openings. As you probably know, although Ibn al Arabi was born and raised in Islamic Spain, Al-Andalus, he died and is buried in Damascus. So he traveled, and that travel is important because it explains why he became such a larger-than-life figure in the Muslim East. So these Muslim thinkers like Ibn al Arabi and al-Hakim at-Tirmidhi and their followers argued that due to the unique qualities of their character and their superior knowledge of God and his creation, the awliya are successors to the prophets, warathat al-anbiya, or khulafa, or nuwab, also deputies of the prophet. All these terms are used in the sources. They're not of mine. Ibn al Arabi, al-Hakim at-Tirmidhi, and their followers, those who were interested in the doctrine of sainthood, believed that God entrusted the awliya to guide the community on the straight path, to train their own successors, or muridun, and to provide comfort, advice, and blessings to ordinary believers. Interestingly, Al-Hakim al-Tirmizi, who has a nickname Al-Hakim, the wise sage, he placed wali above the sage, while also identifying the ones spoken to by God, muhaddathun, not muhaddithun, but muhaddathun, the ones spoken to by God, as the greatest among the awliya. He discusses it in the book that I showed, Sainthood and Authority, on these pages. Ibn al Arabi too talked about at length about various categories of walaya or wilaya and awliya. In fact, he created a whole hierarchy, invisible hierarchy of men of the unseen, rijal al-ghayb in Arabic. He discusses this in the second volume of Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyya. He talks about these individuals, but it will take us away from if I discuss all these categories of the men of the unseen, if I discuss them in my presentation. So I just skip it and move on. These two thinkers and many other Sufis considered the awliya perfect human beings who had bridged the material and divine realms by combining in themselves the characteristics of both. In other words, we have material bodies, and the saints also have material bodies, but they manage to control their bodies, and they become angel-like or even divine. Thereby, they combine the characteristic of the material phenomenal world with the characteristic of the spiritual world, invisible world. So, but not only the Sufis, whom I just mentioned, and other Sufis were interested in the phenomenon of perfection. How can one become perfect? How can one achieve the status of the perfect man, al-insan al-kamil? What is interesting, in the 9th and 10th century, there was a group of intellectuals called Ikhwan al-Safa, the Brethren of Purity. They resided in Basra, and according their exact identity, religious identity is debated, but it seems that they were Ismailis, or Ismaili philosophers, I would say, that is Shia. So what do they say about perfection? And they defined the perfect man, or the perfect human individual, as being of Persian derivation, Arabic in faith, Iraqi, that is Babylonian, in education, a Hebrew in astuteness, a disciple of Christ in conduct, and as pious as a Syrian monk, a Greek in the individual sciences, an Indian in the interpretation of all mysteries, but lastly and especially a Sufi in his whole spiritual life. I quote Sayyid Hossein Nasr, the great scholar of Iran, and who is still residing in the United States. And he quotes Ikhwan al-Safa and their definition of the perfect man. So a very different vision of human perfection and sainthood is found in the discourses of Muslim jurists and theologians, that is, fuqaha and mutakallimun, who are usually described by Western Islamologists as traditionalists or traditionist, emphasizing that they were very heavily involved in the collection of traditions. They're not traditional, but traditionist in that they collected the hadith. If you call the hadith tradition, then they were traditionist. Or fundamentalist. However, in the Sunni sources, this group of people, theologians and jurists, is described as Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the people of the Prophet's Sunnah and community or consensus. Jama'ah is both a community, but it's ijma is consensus. So it's a play on words. So unlike the thinkers mentioned above, that is Ibn al Arabi, al-Hakim al-Tirmizi, their followers, as well as Ikhwan al-Safa, probably thinkers, the traditionalists, fundamentalists, or Ahlus Sunnah wal Jamaat emphasize a subordinate, even servile status of the believers in this world. Their inability to comprehend God's creative design or their own place in this design, and consequently, they are incapable of guiding themselves to salvation. To be guided and saved, they must fulfill the commands of the Quran and imitate the Prophet and his companions every step of the way. These fundamentalists, or Jama'ah Sunni, to use a category that was introduced by Muslim scholars, but used by Hodgson in his Venture of Islam, Jama'ah Sunni jurists and theologians paint a very different portrait of the friend of God, Wali, from that described in my previous slides. For them, the Wali is primarily an obedient, compliant servant of God who observes meticulously all the divine injunction enunciated in the Quran and follows in the footsteps of the Prophet as described in the Sunnah in the minutest detail. So this brings us to the two protagonists, to the two main characters of my presentation, Ibn al Arabi and Ibn Taymiyyah. They had two different visions of the perfect or perfected friend of God. To highlight the differences between the two concepts of human perfection and sainthood, I will examine how they are articulated in the works of Ibn al Arabi and Ibn Taymiyyah. You see their dates on the slide, so I will, just to save time, I will not repeat them. My sources include three treatises by Ibn Taymiyyah called Al-Furqan, Al-Mu'jiza, Al-Sufiyya wal-Fuqara. Ibn al Arabi's theory of walaya is well known. I know, I'm pretty sure many of you have heard about it. There, it is expounded, elucidated in his Fusus al-Hikam, the bezels of wisdom or ringstones of wisdom. There are two different translations, and the Meccan revelations or Meccan openings, again, two different translations. And they have been, works have been discussed, and this theory has been discussed in English by my colleague, William Chittick of the State University of New York. Instead of recounting the details of my examination, because our time is short, it's late in Michigan, it's almost 10:30 p.m. So I will go straight to my conclusions. I examined all the sources and then I came up with some conclusions that I would like to share with you. So I will save you the discussion of the details of my argument, but you are welcome to ask about how I arrived at these conclusions at the end of my presentation. Are there any questions thus far?
Kan dia ada doktor, lepas tu kan kira memang okey, tapi kurus. So kenapa mana ialah naik, dia kata kita tak boleh memang dia lain terus.
So I cannot hear the questions. I hear some background noise. But any questions? No, then I will go straight to the conclusions. After examining Ibn Taymiyyah's disagreements with the heretical pseudo-Sufis, al-Malahida, al-Mutasawwifa, and their doyen, that is their leader, Ibn al Arabi, regarding prophethood and sainthood and perfection. I confirm my statement that I made many years ago in my first book on Ibn Arabi, the Ibn Arabi in the later Islamic tradition. The two Muslim thinkers exemplify very different, in fact, irreconcilable theological positions and worldview. And this is abundantly evident, this is clear from how they define sainthood and human perfection. I agree with a Catholic scholar who is in charge of the Pontific Institute of Arabic and Islamic Studies in Vatican, Diego Sario, that overall Ibn Taymiyyah's understanding of this important notions is anti-elitist, if not democratic, compared to Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi and Ibn al Arabi. As a proof text, I can cite a brief passage from Ibn Taymiyyah's The Sufis and the Poor, As-Sufiya wal-Fuqara. Actually, the treatise discusses the difference or correspondence between the names Sufi and Faqir, the poor one. This treatise was translated into English by the late Thomas Emil Homerin, a good friend of mine who passed away, unfortunately, 3 years ago. And that's what Ibn Taymiyyah says in his treatise. The friends, awliya of God, the quotation marks are not mine, they are Emil Homerin's, are the pious believers, whether called poor, faqir, Sufi, legist, scholar, merchant, soldier, artisan, amir, governor, or something else. So as you can see, that's why we can say that Ibn Taymiyyah is anti-elitist. Ibn Taymiyyah is uncomfortable with the idea that God randomly selects certain individuals as his friends, who then form a privileged spiritual club, per Diego Sario, and a complex hierarchy similar to the one described in Ibn Arabi's Futuhat, and earlier in Hakim al-Tirmidhi's Seal of the Saints, Khatm al-Awliya. In the statement quoted above and elsewhere, Ibn Taymiyyah throws open the gate of friendship to every, with God, that is sainthood, walaya, wilaya, to every believer, in stark contrast to the spiritual and gnoseological elitism advocated by at-Tirmidhi and Ibn al Arabi, or the Akbarians generally, for instance, Abdul Karim al-Jili, al-Kunawi, and so forth. Yet the hierarchy of excellence in perfection and walaya certainly exist in both Ibn Taymiyyah's and Ibn Arabi's visions of Islam. So who are the greatest saints for the Hanbali theologian, for Ibn Taymiyyah? No human except, he says, except the Prophet can be perfect. In his hierarchy of perfection and sainthood, Abu Bakr is the next best perfect and saintly individual. He is followed by Omar, Uthman, Ali, and so on, the Sahaba. The same applies to the Sufis, or rather those whom later Sufis regard as their predecessors, such as Fudail ibn Iyad, Ibrahim ibn Adham, Abu Sulaiman al-Darani, Ma'aruf al-Qarhi, al-Junayd, Sahl al-Tustari. In other words, the closer one is to the Prophet in time and manners, the more perfect and saintly they are. This is the continuation of my argument, of my conclusion one. For Ibn Taymiyyah, at-Tirmidhi, and Ibn Arabi's discourses about the present and future seals of the saints, various categories of men of the unseen, Rijal al-Ghaib, and of divine Gnostics, al-Arifun billah, not only nonsensical, but in fact outright heretical. So Ibn Taymiyyah doesn't mince words. He says they are malahida, that is, atheists almost, or unbelievers. Their insights and imaginings, khayalat, basair, insist Ibn Taymiyyah, are only valid insofar as they comply or confirm the precepts of the Quran and the Sunnah. When they speak about things that are not in the Quran and the Sunnah, they are just figments of their imagination. They rely too much on the imagination, and I'll say more about it in the Ibn Taymiyyah's notions of sainthood and perfection are completely devoid of any metaphysical, cosmological dimensions that loom so large in the legacy of the Akbarian school of Sufism. Ibn Taymiyyah's saint is thoroughly down to earth. Ibn Taymiyyah's wali meticulously observes the commands of God and the Prophet in his everyday behavior, but his life and actions have nothing to do with the life and functioning of the cosmos. Here, the contrast between Ibn al Arabi's and his followers' cosmological mysticism is truly striking. Whereas for Ibn Arabi, Ibn Arabi's saint is an essential part of the cosmos that connects the divine and human realms and gives the true reality, al-haq, its self-knowledge. In other words, the true reality, that is God, or the absolute, the divine absolute, learns about itself by seeing its reflection in a perfect human being, that is the awliya. For Ibn Taymiyyah, saint is busy with his personal salvation and helping others to achieve it. So Ibn Taymiyyah, saint, has nothing to do with metaphysics, cosmology. He's just an ordinary human being who tries to practice Islam to perfection using the Quran and the Sunnah as his guidelines. Conclusion 2, whatever divinely bestowed insights and supernatural acts, khawarik lil-ada, or that the Ibn Taymiyyah saint exhibits, they are but byproducts of his exemplary personal piety and loyalty to the Quran, Sunnah, and the ways of the pious ancestors of Islam, as-salaf, as-salih. In contrast, Ibn al Arabi and his predecessors, for example, Al-Hakim al-Tirmidhi and followers, Al-Qunawi, Al-Qaisari, Abdul Karim Jili, never tire of emphasizing the uniqueness of the saint as a perfect human individual, both on the ontological and gnoseological or epistemological planes. Epistemology or gnoseology, it's a theory of knowledge. That's basically, ontology is a theory of being. His veridical unveilings, mukashafat, tajalliyat, and tasting, adwaq, placed Ibn Arabi's saint high above the average Muslim, including jurists and theologians whom Ibn al Arabi condescendingly describes as scholars of outward rulings or appearances, ulama ar-rusum. Chittik suggests appearances, and it's a good translation. For Ibn Arabi, imagination is an essential cognitive tool. The wali uses the imagination to understand the divine design, to enter the realm of the true realities, haqaiq of existence, which is located between the material world and the phenomenal and the world of divine presence, malakut, it's sometimes called. But this intermediate world that is located between these two worlds, the divine and the human world, and the imagination can penetrate it and enter it. Khayal can enter it and bring new knowledge that the saint can then share with his followers. That explains why saints have following, because they can enter the realm that is not accessible to ordinary human beings and borrow knowledge from there, or witness knowledge, taste knowledge, as Ibn Arabi would say there. For Ibn Taymiyyah, interestingly, imagination is the stomping ground of Satan. He says this explicitly, Khayalat, Mawdi' al-Shaitan. And in his minions, that is the host, the helpers of Satan. So imagination is the place in which Satan whispers lies in the ears of the unwary, or try to tempt them by showing them some beautiful but false images and making enticing but fraudulent propositions. In other words, the imagination is the playing ground of Satan. So exactly the opposite of Ibn Arabi's idea that imagination is essential for human understanding of the world and God. In this sense, the realm of imagination for the Hanbali theologian and jurist is no different from physical places commonly believed to be infested by satanic forces, such as latrines, that are public toilets, public baths, hashish dens, and graveyards. Thus, taking my cue from Hodgson's concept of imaginative piety, so Sufism for Hodgson is imaginative piety, I would describe Ibn Taymiyyah's religious stance as unimaginative or anti-imaginative piety. I'm approaching the end of my presentation, so persevere with me a little bit. Ibn Arabi's allegorizing and esoteric interpretation of both scripture and reality stand in sharp contrast to Ibn Taymiyyah's literalism and rule book mentality. When Ibn Arabi discusses the mysteries of the Sharia in the long sections of his Futuhat, he uses juridical norms and terminology to showcase his favorite ontological, metaphysical, and gnoseological, epistemological themes. He does the same with the Quranic stories of the prophets, hadith, poetry, and other texts. So he uses them as show windows for his favorite ideas, which are limited in number. And the main idea is that wahdatul wujud, the unity of all existence. Ibn Taymiyyah rejects such interpretations, esoteric or allegorical interpretation out of hand, as heretical and devilish, and unequivocally condemns them as ravings of madmen. For him, the era of prophecy and revelation ended with the death of the prophet and his companions. The texts they left behind are clear and unambiguous, so there is no need to excavate for hidden meaning as the heretical, quote unquote, pseudo-Sufis, al-Mutasawwif, al-Malahida, and the Shi'is do. In the same way, Ibn Arabi uses juridical terminology to elucidate his unitive metaphysics, that is wahdatul wujud, and gnoseology, ma'arifa. Ibn Taymiyyah uses Sufi concepts mentioned in my presentations and many others. So Ibn Arabi doesn't ignore Sufi terminology and concept. He uses them, but he uses them to promote his own vision of a sober, Sharia-abiding Sufism, shorn or free of its controversial cosmology and claims to superior esoteric knowledge of God, prophecy, and the cosmos. So, in other words, Ibn Taymiyyah doesn't reject Sufism out of hand. In fact, he constructs his own vision of Sufism, which I just described: Sharia abiding, no cosmology, no claims to superior knowledge, to ability to have direct contact with God. My fifth and last point is tentative because it requires a broader and more careful examination. In the last or 27th chapter of the Fusus, Ibn al Arabi discusses various important roles women and femininity play in God's creative design and human-divine relationships. He also explains allegorically a number of juridical norms pertaining to women in the relevant chapters of his Futuhat. The text of Ibn Taymiyyah I have consulted for this study are totally silent in this respect. In other words, his discourses in this text do not seem to have any feminine dimension. However, this absence may be accidental and inconsequential because we know for sure that he discusses women and norms of not modesty incumbent on women in his legal writings, in his fatawa, in his fatwas. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I've made myself clear. If you have any questions, I will be happy to.
Salam, Professor Alexander. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Imran from Malaysia. Okay, my question
Yes.
is, we know the role of the sainthood in the society, that they do doa, the protection of ummah, and what are their role in this today's society? What we could implement it in today's world? And that's my question in the comments also. Can you understand my question?
The question is, I'll try to repeat it and you will correct me if I'm wrong. So you're asking what is the place of sainthood in today's Islam, right? And is it relevant to the aspirations and actions of today's Muslims?
Yeah, yes, Prof.
That's the question. So first of all, we all are very different people. Some people really need a guidance. If they cannot find this guidance in the books, they turn to a human, breathing, living, breathing human being whom they believe has a special stature, special status in the eyes of God, and who may have direct line to God. Then if you are such a person who needs guidance of a living and breathing person, you identify a wali and you follow him. This wali becomes your sheikh. So yes, it's very relevant to the aspirations of today's Muslims, especially those who are not satisfied with the juridical treatises or with the Sharia focused version of Islam, which is equally valid maybe, or at least as valid as saint-oriented Islam. But that would be my answer. I hope I answer your question, Mr. Imran.
Hi, Professor. I'm Jamizal from Putrajaya. Thank you very much for your lecture. I only have two questions. First, in terms of the degree between sainthood and prophethood. Do prophets need to undergo the sainthood level first before they achieve the prophethood? What is the difference between these two degrees? And is that true, the statement that all prophets must be a saint first before they can achieve the prophethood? You can elaborate that. And second question, you know, in the Malay archipelago, Ibn Taymiyyah is not that popular. It's kind of isolated kind of opinion, but we are more prone to Al-Ghazali concept of Sufism or Tasawwuf. And then I believe you know that in Malay archipelago, our prominent reference is of course Ihya Ulumuddin, right? the revival of religious sciences. So how do you think Al-Ghazali fit into this sainthood and prophethood kind of discussion, and how it fasts from notion by Ibn Taymiyyah? Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. I'll try. These are big questions. I recently read a very interesting chapter on Malay poetry, which I editing for the volume on Sufi poetry. And as you know, there were, Ibn Taymiyyah may not have been very popular, but there were people who thought like Ibn Taymiyyah and who persecuted Sufis and burned the books of Hamza Fansuri and Abdur Rauf Sinkili, if I remember correctly. So there were opponents. In other words, the Sufis didn't rule supreme in Malay, in the archipelago. There was a period that 15th, I think, 16th, 17th century, the flowering of Sufism, especially the doctrine of Nur Muhammad. But then there were some fundamentalists who got the ear of the Sultan of Aceh, and the Sultan ordered the burning of the books of Sufism, metaphysical, philosophical books. So, in other words, yes, Ibn Taymiyyah, of course, is not popular, but your own history has precedents that show that Sufis did not go unchallenged. And probably this hostility to Sufism continues today in various pockets of Malaysian and Indonesian society. With sainthood and prophethood, well, you probably all read, or at least heard, that Ibn Arabi was accused of placing sainthood above prophethood. And he even used the image of the Kaaba in which two bricks were missing and so forth. The long and short of it, his idea is misinterpreted. He basically says that to be a Nabi, you have to be a Wali. But then not every Wali is a prophet. So a person who combines prophethood and sainthood is the best, occupies the highest position. And then there are individuals who are awliya but can never claim prophethood, or they do not live up to the theory. But this theory can be easily misinterpreted, and it was, and that's why Ibn Arabi and his followers were often accused of preferring sainthood to prophethood. If we look from the sociological viewpoint and from human viewpoint, why this plays such an important, why emphasize sainthood? Because I think, and the Shia also share that, because as you probably know, that the Shia also use the word wali to describe their imams. So Sufis and Shias use the same term, but they have different understanding of it, because the Shia, why the Shia and the Sufis, Sunni Sufis, wanted the wilayah to continue, because they thought that without the exponents of Islam, without awliya, and this is, we are come to Al-Ghazali, Islam is dead. It needs to be constantly reinvigorated by the awliya. And Al-Ghazali says this much. Basically, the legal Sufism, the Sufism of Mutakallim, doesn't give human being psychological and emotional satisfaction. only when combined with internal development, internalizing of Islam, external Islam, it should be internalized. And he saw no better way to do it than through Sufism. By using Sufi ideas, by using Sufi practices, Al-Ghazali thought that a person can purify themselves, internalize Islam, and achieve salvation. Because if you study only theology and even fiqh, it will bring you nothing but doubt. You will be engaged in senseless polemic. And he said, this is laysa zad lil ma'ad. This is not the provision for the hereafter. You need this spirituality. And he found this spirituality in Sufism. He found it at the age when Shia were very prominent. They controlled the largest empire in the Muslim world, the Fatimid Empire, which occupied a huge area from Turkey all the way to Morocco. And it had a powerful ideology. Ibn Arabi wanted to, Al-Ghazali wanted to counter this ideology by saying that Sunni Islam is not only about legal bickering about minor issues, how to wash yourself, how to part your hair, how to go to the restroom, but it should be internalized. And Sufis represent, in effect, beacons of spirituality, in the same way as the Shia Imams and their followers and their progeny, Imam Zadehs, represent the spirituality. So it was an attempt to counter the threat, the ideological threat of Shiism, which was very rife at his age. That's my answer. I don't know if I answered all the questions. The questions are difficult, and it's my personal opinion. I do not claim that that it is final. So why Al-Ghazali became such a large figure, accepted practically by all except maybe individuals like Ibn al-Jawzi, who called him a poor expert on hadith, who used good hadith and bad hadith, but it's beyond it. Or even some Salafis. Why Al-Ghazali was accepted by Sunnis? Because he was a real reformer of Islam. He wanted to re-spiritualize Islam. He used Sufism as this re-spiritualization. He used the idea of mukashafa as the better tool than just naql wal aql, that is transmitted knowledge and intellectual knowledge. And he was successful. Ibn Arabi was too esoteric, too difficult for the majority of people, because if you read Ihya Ulum ad-Din, you have no problem at all. It's plain Arabic, written by not a native speaker, but still his Persian was mother's tongue, but very eloquently, and Ibn Al-Ghazali wanted it to be read by everyone. Ibn Arabi writes, he always says, Ya Wali. So he's addressing it to his own club of the initiated in the mysteries he wants to explain. So, and that's why reading Ibn Arabi by an outsider makes no sense. It only enrages people. And Ibn Taymiyyah also says that Ibn Arabi is deliberately obfuscating what he's wanted to say, either because he wants to conceal his heresy, or he just cannot write differently. So, that's why Ibn Arabi didn't even found a tariqa. He didn't establish a tariqa. What emerged as Al-Akbariyya was like a group, a club of refined intellectuals who tried to popularize his ideas or tried to rationalize him, as Al-Jami did, as Qaisari did, as Kunawi did, Al-Jilid was a different story. But they tried to explain what he wanted to say. But in the process, they simply imposed Ibn Taymiyyah on Ibn Arabi and created a synthesis. So of Ibn Arabi and the ontology of Ibn Sina, which was philosophy basically, and became a standard later on. So he didn't find a real tariqa, unlike his contemporaries. Who were his contemporaries? His contemporaries, Ash-Shadili, Shadili, then Abdul Qadir al-Jilani and his progeny, his children, numerous children, As-Suhrawardi. They were organizers. They also had very able lieutenants who managed to establish lasting tariqas. I forgot to mention that also Naqshbandiya, but it's later, somewhat later. Qadiriyya, Suhrawardiya, Shadiliya were the original tariqas, very successful. And then, of course, in the Indian subcontinent, Chishtiya. So they were all contemporaries. Chishti was the same time as Ibn Arabi, but you see the difference. Chishti was in institution building. And he wanted to build a large institution, and he succeeded. So, any other questions? I don't know, Jamizal, if I answered your question.
Interesting answer, Prof. Thank you very much. Maybe you can look at the chat box. There are a few interesting questions also. How to know whether somebody is achieved sainthood or not? How to know that somebody has achieved a sainthood or otherwise?
How do we know if?
How do we know that certain people or human being has achieved a sainthood? Whether he tells the people about that or we have certain features. Yeah.
Yes. How can people identify saints? Saints claim to know something. Awliya claim to know something others people do not know. You have to take their word for it. But they also live exemplary lives. What separates awliya from other people is their lack of egoism. They are not egotistic. They want to help others to purify themselves and to reach a higher level of spiritual awareness and intellectual awareness. And you also know that they're mutashayikh, they're sheikhs and mutashayikh. Sheikh is the real one, and then there are people who pretend to be. And they gave a bad name to sheikhs, and the Salafis who criticize Sufis, they use these examples to say that the sheikhs, they are all charlatans, they are all misleading people, they're exploiting them and so forth. But they forget that they have the same sheikhs in Saudi Arabia, like Ibn Taymiyyah, Fawzan ibn Fawzan, whom they also almost venerate. So they are accusing other people of doing what they are doing. So in that sense, but it's simply the necessity of sainthood is because people want the prophecy to continue in one form or another. They want God to continue to speak to the community through individuals chosen by God, divinely chosen by God, who claim to be heirs to the prophet or inheritors of prophethood. In Shia Islam, this problem was resolved by the Imam until the last Imam disappeared, but then he came to be represented by the Rijal, that is the Rijal ad-Din, the scholars. So yeah, it's all about the necessity for the majority of people to have guidance, and their lack of satisfaction with the cessation, this stoppage of prophethood, with the with the death of the Prophet. That's why we see such movements as Ahmadiyya, Babiyya, and all emerging out of Islam. Yes.
Assalamualaikum, Doctor. My name is Imran from Malaysia. A different Imran compared to the first one. My question is, in today's era, like today in 2023, is there any person or any leader that we can consider as a saint for Muslim? Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, can you repeat yourself? Is there any?
In today's era, in 2023, this year, as we are living right now, with a lot of challenges among Muslims, are there any person that we can safely consider as saint for the Muslims to refer to?
I think sainthood, and I am saying a very trivial thing. Sainthood is in the eye of the beholder. You find someone, that person's characteristic, it can be male or female. There are puras, yes, they're female sheikhs. You can see that person and immediately you feel attracted, jazba, to that person. So as for the real individuals I know, they live in my state, in Michigan. That's Sheikh Hisham Qabbani and his son, Sheikh Noor. They represent the Naqshbandiyya, Sufi Mujaddidiyya, Sufi order, which, as you know, originated in India. But and his followers see him as the only legitimate representative of the Naqshbandiyya tradition, and maybe the only legitimate sheikh. But if you go and his brother-in-law and his followers, they Sheikh Adil, Mehmet Adil, the son of Sheikh Nazim, they see him as the only legitimate sheikh, and they consider Sheikh Hisham, if not an imposter, then really unjustified or futile claimant to sainthood. Unfortunately, Sufism is, and that's, Salafis use this against Sufism. They say Sufism divides the Muslim community because each group claims that their sheikh is the only legitimate one. But on the personal level, if you are looking for a sheikh and you encounter some individual, you will immediately feel that this is the real one, whereas others were not. So I'm sorry not to say that there is one sheikh. Until recently, Salafis had, the majority of Salafis had Qaradawi as their sheikhs, and Muslim brothers also. So Muslim brotherhood is based on the Sufi model of organization, and this is obvious, and it has Sufi roots from Al-Banna. But nowadays, I would say there's no one who is universally recognized as the wali. No one in the Sunni world.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Thank you.
There's a hand.
Yes, it's myself, Frank. Frank, thank you very much, Doctor, for a very, very interesting discussion and talk. I just want to go back to the word when you started about al-insan al-kamil. In Arabic, the word kamil means complete. And everywhere it's, as you have also suggested, in English, it's translated as the perfect man. And I'm just wondering why the word perfect is there. I think that is probably one of the reasons why it is problematic.
Yeah, Ibn Arabi also, I think, was
is
aware.
very difficult to qualify. Sorry, yeah. So,
yeah,
so the word perfection is very, it's unlimited, infinite. So, if we say it's complete, then we are talking about a specific limited amount of knowledge and experience. Once it's achieved, it doesn't mean they're perfect. It's whatever they are. It's their full potential. It's like reaching your full potential, and the rest of us are not living to our full potential. So maybe that's another. I don't know. It's just a personal opinion here.
Yeah, I think so. Ibn Arabi was aware of this problem, so he uses al-kamil at-tam. Tamam is a comprehensive, complete and perfect. And the idea is, of course, predates Islam. It's a Jewish idea, Adam Kadmon. So it's a very ancient idea. People wanted to see a perfect human individual. They wanted to find such an individual and maybe even worship him or her. But Ibn Arabi also says that every age has its own qutb, its own pole, who is the perfect man of that epoch. It's not permanent. It's a rotating. And he says that the qutb occupies not the central, the highest level of that human perfection in that particular age and time. But then there are also the best. So, for instance, when this perfect individual of a certain age dies, he is replaced by one of the autad, that's the pegs that are located underneath it. And the whole hierarchy moves. Someone is inducted into the lowest rank, and it becomes again whole 362, I think, or so he names. So yeah, he was aware that, and he says basically even every village has its own qutb. Every village has its own spiritual pole. So there are many of them. But he then complicated things for the later Sufis. He said that there is the final greatest perfect man is Jesus, or Quranic Jesus. He is Khatm al-Wilaya al-Amma. He is the seal of the universal sainthood. It's of course not the Jesus of Christians. It's a Jesus who will appear, will take the stand against the Dajjal, will kill him, break the cross, kill the pig, and so forth. It's all this eschatological. So, but then he also says that there is a Muslim, the person of the Muslim, the supreme Muslim saint. In his divan, he indicates indirectly that he is the one. So after him, there can be no, but because it's not clearly stated, and Ibn Arabi never wanted things to be complete or crisp, clear, and unambiguous. So he left the door open for later followers of Ibn Arabi to claim sainthood. And there were at least a dozen of people who claimed that they were the seals of the Muhammadan sainthood, the perfect individuals, the greatest perfect saints of the entire Muslim community, who are supposed to pave the way for the arrival of the final perfect man, the Quranic Jesus. So it's a complicated, but Ibn Arabi, in other words, gave the ammunition to people like At-Tijani and many other individuals who claim that they were the seals of universal sainthood, not Ibn Arabi. So it's...
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much all for the questions that you have directed to our Professor Knysh for today. But I have to remind you all that the time at US right now is actually night and it's approaching midnight. So I think Professor Knysh also need to get rest for him. So can we go to the last question? I think the last question here is good that if I can read from the comment section here.
It's in the chat? In the chat?
In the chat. Yeah, in the chat session. Yes. There are two questions here. First by Imran and also second by Muna. I read by Imran first. Salam, Doctor. In today's landscape, are there any Muslim leader we can call as saint? And secondly, by Muna, what does Prof. Knysh observe as the rising trend in our current context of the modern Islamicate regarding any convergence of spiritual and religious authority? Doctor, you are warmly invited to answer the question.
So, yeah, it's Mona. Yeah, Mona's question. Yeah, so I actually wrote about this in my in a chapter that was published by my colleague Juan Cole. Al-Ghazali, you can find an answer to this in Al-Ghazali. He says that it's pretty easy to isolate yourself from the world, to isolate yourself from the imperfect people who often abuse you, who often misunderstand you. But he says people should go to, the real Sufis should prove themselves by going to the aswaq, going to the bazaar and encountering and dealing with imperfect human beings and trying to make them better, leading by example, if you wish, or instructing them morally and so forth. So there's a tension between the desire to achieve personal salvation by fleeing from the world, like escaping into the jungles, like some Indian mystics did, or hiding in a cave, or going to an empty seashore and practicing worshiping God there for the personal benefit. But Al-Ghazali already in Ihya Ulumuddin says no. The Sufis who live an arbita in ribats, in their lodges, they should leave this and go to the people and try to make them better. Although they will suffer abuse, ridicule, they still have to go. So that's, he thought that it was more challenging to live in the world among imperfect people and try to lead them, at least morally. As for the Sufis who were also political and military leaders, you can find a lot of examples. Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, after whom several cities in the United States are named, Amir al-Qadir, he was a Sufi of the Qadiri Brotherhood, but he was also a military leader whom the French eventually captured. Another individual who led a whole state in the North Caucasus, in the former Russian Empire, was Shamwil, or Shamil as he is known in the sources. He was Samuel Shamwil. That's how he signed. He was also created a formidable state that Russians couldn't conquer for 30 years. There was a long war. Eventually, he was also captured, paraded across Russia, like they did the same with Abdul Qadir, the French, and then eventually sent into exile, eventually released and died in Medina. So, and then we have Med Mullah in Somalia, Somaliland, and the Mahdi, Ahmad al-Mahdi of Sudan. They were all Sufis who were also political leaders. The last king of Libya was also Idris, was a Sufi leader, spiritual leader, but he was overthrown by Gaddafi. So we have many instances when Sufis combine political and spiritual guidance. How successfully we can debate with this. So there was the second question, today's landscape, any Muslim leader? Yeah, I cannot name anyone. I can name individuals who enjoy a large following, but they're not universally recognized.
Thank you so much, Prof, for your answer on the question. And I think we should conclude our session for today. Yes, Prof also have given his lecture. Prof has also answered all of our questions. And I believe many of us have already asked very interesting questions for today. So on behalf of Tradisi, I would like to thank all of you for today's session. Thank you for attentively listening to our Prof lecture. And I would like to thank Prof Alexander Knysh for his warm lecture today, giving us information, so informative of his lecture today. Yes, I think that's all for us.
Thank you for hosting me, and thank you for listening. It's still morning, and it's getting very late here.
Yeah,
So,
it's very late there. So I'm quite worried for you, for your health and so on. And I hope that after this, you will get a very good rest. You'll have a very good night. Inshallah. 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 And don't worry, for others, do keep up with our programs in our Instagram later on. We have, for your information, Prof, and also everyone here, we will have introduction to logic class given by Dr. Fauzi later on from 24 to 28 May. Yeah. If you all wanted to join, please keep up with Tradisi. Very enlightening for today, yes, Mr. Jamizan. And I think that's all. We should conclude our class today with Tasbih Kifarah and Suratul As. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika asyhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wal 'asr innal insana lafi khusr illa allazina amanu wa 'amilus solihat yatawassaw bil haqq wa tawassaw bis sabr. Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you so much, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi. Recording will be shared, inshallah.